Is God's will always done?
Yes.
Is God's will always done? So everything that happens is God's will.
I believe so.
If in his will, yes.
So everything is what he wanted to happen. Okay. So now think about, has anybody here ever sinned?
Never.
All right,
Just kidding.
think about the biggest sin you ever committed in your life. You don't have to share it. Just think about the biggest sin you ever committed in your life. Do you think that was God's will? Or were you going against God's will?
Oh,
Going against God's will.
yeah.
Then his will wasn't done in that situation. So the question, so can you influence God's will? You definitely can influence it in your life. You can make God's will not be done in your life.
Right.
But he was praying specifically for what God had already said. So if God already gave a declaration in his word, a lot of times we want to pray God's word back to him. We want to pray God's word back to him. So if God has already decreed something, then you want to pray it. If God has already made a promise in the Bible, or if he's spoken to you, then you want to pray back to him that. So prayer doesn't make God do what he doesn't want to happen. So if God doesn't want something to happen, you can't necessarily pray and get him to make it happen.
Right.
So God, but also we see that this was something that God wanted to happen, but it happened because Elijah prayed. So prayer released it to happen. So God already decreed that it was going to happen, and it was the prayer that released it to happen. So you have to wonder, are there things that are waiting to be released, waiting for someone to pray for them? You know, are there promises waiting to be released, waiting for someone to pray for them? Then the next thing is that we want to pray in accordance to God's will. Or Elijah prayed in accordance to God's will. We see in Matthew, in the Lord's Prayer, let's see, someone have Matthew 6, 9 through 13.
Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Right, your will be done. So Jesus told us to pray that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So, do you think Jesus would have us pray a prayer just to pass our time, or that there would be a reason that we would have to pray it? So if we're praying for God's will to be done, it's not just to pass our time. There's a reason. So he's telling us to pray for God's will to be done. So obviously the prayer must have some impact on it being done. So he's telling us to pray that God's will be done on earth because it's done in heaven. His will is done in heaven, because I don't know if necessarily all of the cherubim and seraphim, I don't think they have free will. His will is done in heaven, but on earth his will is not always done. People still sin. People still. So he tells us to pray that God's will be done. So this implies that the prayer helps God's will get done. Jesus prays the prayer that. So prayer is the mechanism that God created to get his will implemented on earth. I mean, obviously, he could do it without us, but there are scenarios where he wants us to partner with him. Another thing we want to do, or we can do, is to remind God of what he already said, which is sort of similar, but remind God of what he said. So an example of that is the story of Moses and the golden calf. The story of Moses and the golden calf. The Israelites had created a golden calf. Moses went up to the mountain to meet God. While he was away, they took the gold and created a golden calf. And God told Moses, oh, they've done an abominable thing down there, and I'm going to destroy them. He said, I'm going to start over with you, Moses. He said, I'm going to destroy them, and I'm going to start over with you. But then Moses reminds God of the promises he made. So somebody have, and this is something that's interesting and still, I probably need to study it out more, but it's there, and it says it. Somebody have Exodus 32, 13 to 14? Okay.
Remember your servant Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened.
Right. So Moses said, God said, I'm going to destroy these people. They're just down there acting a fool. I'm going to destroy them and start over with you. And Moses said, remember Abraham? You made a promise to Abraham to make his descendants multiple as the stars. Remember Isaac? Remember the promise you made to Israel? And so, my version, it says, so the Lord changed his mind about the harm he said he was going to do to his people. So Moses reminded him of what he had promised. So that's something we can do, is remind God of what he promised.
God, you said.
Right. God, you said. And then we see David often prays, remember this, that I did this. And so I see this as kind of God. So then the question is, well, how could God, if God has something that's his will, how could his will change? Because he's sovereign, he's omnipotent. So I see this as, so God was in relationship with Israel. God is in relationship with us. If we look at the story of Esther, there was a king. She was a queen.
Yeah.
She went to go see the king. She was scared because he could have killed her just to go and talk to him. But the king, she asked for something, and the king, he wasn't going to do it, but Esther asked, and he did it because he thought she was beautiful. She was his wife. He was in relationship with her. So it may not have been something he initially wanted to do or something he thought was right, but because he agreed to be in a relationship with her, he would take her opinion or her desires into consideration. So I think maybe it's the same way with God. Since we're in a relationship with God, then maybe are asking for something, even though he's wiser and he knows something, the fact that we would ask could influence them. And we see that also in the story of Hezekiah in 2 Kings chapter 20. I'm not going to go, but Hezekiah, Isaiah came to Hezekiah and said, you're going to die. You're going to die tomorrow. And Hezekiah went and they said he prayed against the wall and he prayed to God. He said, I've been a loyal servant. I've been faithful. And he cried to God. And God went and talked to Isaiah, and God came back the next day and said, okay, I'll give you 15 more years. So God gave Isaiah a prophecy. You're going to die. So this is the word of the Lord. The Lord had decreed, you're dying tomorrow. I just wanted to give you a heads up. Since you guys are close, I'm going to give you a heads up. You'll be the first to know. But Hezekiah prayed and cried to God, and God said, okay, I'll give you 15 more years. So even though he had prophesied, he had made a prophecy. He made a decree. But the pleading of Hezekiah changed his mind.